Good morning and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Wednesday morning. We have a live shot of the Ben Franklin Parkway. Pretty foggy out this morning, but we're going to move right to the latest in political news. A House committee is poised to hold Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress, the opening salvo in what could be a lengthy, acrimonious court battle between House Democrats and President Donald Trump's administration over Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. Fox's Doug Luzader has more.
Our United States Attorney General could be held in contempt of Congress, and Democrats may start that process in about, 3 hours.
And there's really been a flurry of last-minute negotiations, but, well, Doug, it looks like there's not a resolution in sight.
There is not. It doesn't mean that they might not reach some kind of, negotiated settlement in the next 3 hours or so. We'll see. The White House is really asking Democrats in Congress to pump the brakes on this, and they're offering something of a counter threat if the Attorney General is held in contempt.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr is taking more incoming from House Democrats, and it could hit a fever pitch later this morning.
At the moment, it's still scheduled.
Barr's nemesis, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler, may move ahead with plans to hold Barr in contempt of Congress because he won't turn over a full, unredacted copy of the Robert Mueller Russia report that Democrats want to see.
It is a sweeping, categorical defiance of the will of Congress, and that just can't stand.
But Barr has a threat of his own. If he is held in contempt, President Trump could claim executive privilege and essentially end cooperation with Democrats on the committee.
Well, this is a rapid escalation in this constitutional conflict. Usually this kind of letter, the subpoenas, would take months, if not maybe a year, to get to this point. You're really seeing both sides already going to their most aggressive constitutional positions.
Barr would not be the first AG to be held in contempt. During the Obama administration, Republicans did the same thing to Obama Attorney General Eric Holder for failing to turn over documents to Congress. Barr says in this case, his hands are tied because he can't legally release some portions of the report that include grand jury material. And Republicans say it is time to move on.
The special counsel's finding is clear. Case closed.
And if Barr is held in contempt, it becomes a matter for the courts.
Their risk is, if this goes to the court, it goes silent for probably a couple of years while this gets litigated.
Now, Barr has offered to have some members of Congress take a look at a more lightly redacted copy of the Mueller report. Democrats say that is not good enough. So 10 a.m. this morning, we'll see what happens.
It seems like they want all or nothing.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we just hear from Mueller himself, and he can tell us what's in the darn thing?
It sounds like that may happen on May 15th. I mean, that's the plan anyway, but, Mueller still hasn't officially agreed to that yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then his former lawyer, Don McGahn, he defies a House subpoena, too. If anybody ever comes after me with a subpoena, can I just say no? Doug went away.
And in business news this morning, another excuse to spend too much time online. Facebook and Instagram are making it easier for you to schedule appointments. Fox Business's Christina Partsinevelos joined Good Day this morning with more.
Okay, when I say you can now book on Facebook, what do they mean?
We're not talking about read a book.
Okay.
No, we're talking about you can book an appointment, all while still scrolling and double tapping on the gram. Can you believe that? So why don't we bring in Christina?
All right, how does this work? Book an appointment with the auto repair person? Or what are you talking about?
Exactly. Or if you needed a haircut, you could just go on there and check Julie's salon and then click the book now button. And the reason they're doing this is to cater more to businesses and also get you to never, ever leave the platform. They say it's more convenient, but really that's what it's all about. Facebook and they own Instagram want you to stay on there. They want you to do absolutely everything. Not too long ago, they launched a buy now button, and so this is the part of the bigger picture. You do you talk to your friends, you post pictures, you book your appointments, you deal with businesses, and then you buy goods on there like a marketplace, which goes directly against Amazon. So it's all part of the big picture to keep you on the platform.
Can I book an Uber on Instagram?
That's
not yet that I know of, but Uber could do that on their profile. So maybe very shortly, since they just launched this today.
And I have to admit, because where I get my nails done, they have this. And I asked, I was like, oh, can I book my next appointment? She was like, no, just go on Instagram. And I was like, what? But I went on, and it's pretty sophisticated. Like, they show you the hours. You can click what service you want and who you want to do the service. It's not like a simple, like, just click a date. Like,
I would use it.
Yeah.
Like,
Which is great, but then it further adds to us never communicating in real life or on the phone.
Well, that's dumb.
People just text these days. Instead now you're just going to do everything online and rarely interact and just, I guess go to your appointments. You're interacting there. But it's a bigger picture, keep people online.
I order food on Caviar all the time, and sometimes they'll then call me if they didn't have something I ordered.
And you get annoyed.
I don't want to. The reason why I ordered on Caviar is I don't want to talk to you.
But I can totally picture you doing that. Yes.
Oh yeah.
But you're right. But at least you can put specific notes too if you need specific things or you feel like you need to talk.
Well,
to
there
somebody.
better be an alert because I don't check Facebook enough.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it directly goes to your Messenger. So if you have Messenger on your phone and you get those notifications, then you will.
Oh boy.
Soon we'll be doing everything, paying our bills on Instagram and everything else.
Oh, you know what the next step is? Which there were rumors last week that Facebook was looking to launch their own cryptocurrency so that eventually one day you would go shopping online and you would use Facebook digital coins to buy your goods. So they are definitely looking into this. So just the question is when and if it could happen. Will it ever go mainstream? Because we know Bitcoin has been struggling as of late.
It has been struggling. So now you're like, oh, I have to go to the bank. Oh, okay, I'll see you later. No, I'm just going to go on Facebook.
You're bank in your hand.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? Christina, nice job. We'll see you again tomorrow.
And moving on to your Fox 29 Weather Authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for a cooler and cloudy Wednesday with a chance of a stray shower. Temperatures are expected to reach a high of 68 degrees, so a little bit cooler than Tuesday. The forecast should stay dry until Mother's Day on Sunday when it is expected to rain. And here's a look at current temperatures in our area. We have 56 degrees in Mount Pocono, 61 degrees in Lancaster, 62 degrees in Wilmington, 66 in Dover, 72 in Wildwood, and a nearly 60 degrees in Philadelphia this morning. And looking ahead to your 7-day forecast, again, looking at a pretty cloudy, mild Wednesday, and the clouds will continue into Thursday, potential for some rain Friday and Saturday, but more likely on Sunday for a cool and relatively gloomy Mother's Day before the sun returns along with the Philadelphia Phillies. Don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 29 Weather Authority app to have the latest forecast right here in your face. And moving on to some local news, longtime Philadelphia Phillies chairman David Montgomery died this morning at the age of 72. Montgomery has battled cancer for the past 5 years. Montgomery began working with the Phillies back in 1971 in the ticket office. The Phillies will have more at a press conference around 11:30 this morning, so be sure to tune in. And in national news, police say 18-year-old Devin Erickson and another boy are in police custody. It happened yesterday at the STEM school, Highlands Ranch, near Denver. Authorities say Erickson and another student walked into the charter school and opened fire in 2 classrooms. Both of the alleged gunmen attended the school, and they were not previously known to authorities. Sheriff's deputies responded within minutes, arresting them both after a struggle.
All the sign of a guy pull a I believe, a pistol, I'm not sure, out of like guitar case and start to shoot, students.
There's a lot of things wandering around our minds, like who could have done this, why did it happen, but we have no idea. This was completely out of the blue.
The school will be closed for the rest of the week. The shooting comes a week after a gunman killed 2 students and wounded 4 at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and nearly 3 weeks after the neighboring town of Littleton, Colorado, marked 20 years since the Columbine school massacre. And back here at home, we're hearing stray bullets hit a 4-year-old child, one of several people shot last night. It happened on the 4100 block of North Broad Street in Tioga Nicetown. The boy was rushed to Temple University Hospital and reportedly critical but stable. Also shot at that location was a 27-year-old man, also critical at Temple. No arrests have been made at this time, no word on a possible suspect. 3 other men in their 20s were also shot at 2 different locations in the area.
To multiple LGBT
and a student from
on
JHU Garland Hall is speaking out following the removal of a group of students this morning, saying they're making an effort to protect marginalized students as they protest against the Johns Hopkins police force.
Where lesbians have historically lived since the 70s. This same area is also patrolled by Johns Hopkins yellow-vested officers. And I'm here because I don't want those people to have guns, because I know who they would use them against, and that is me. That is other black and brown people. It is people with disabilities. It is people going through challenges. It is people that they don't know and aren't qualified to de-escalate. And we've seen that demonstrated today. We have trouble holding the Baltimore City Police accountable to their own standards and the standards that we have set with them. And we are unconvinced that Johns Hopkins would hold its private police force to the standards that we have for our community. One of those standards is understanding and respect for identities, something that we've seen blatantly trampled on today, as a trans woman was jailed in a men's van, and it took 2 cis women getting arrested. It took all of these people screaming. It took me and others fighting laws that trans people have worked and sat at tables with Baltimore City Police to make up, to hold themselves accountable to diversity that is necessary to be able to serve trans community. We've been at the table with police, and we've seen it get us nowhere because there's no apparatus whereby police hold themselves accountable. And we've seen that demonstrated here today. My thoughts are with Opal. We love you. Can I hear it from y'all? We love you, Opal! We love you, and we are coming for you. We are coming for you because we support our community, and we know who we are. We know who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so talk about how many people were arrested
And we're going to move to New York City now, where drivers for ride-hailing giants Uber and Lyft are planning to turn off their apps to protest what they say are declining wages at a time when both companies are raking in billions of dollars from investors. Stay with us.
Earned half of what they had earned in 2013. A Fiscal Policy Institute report found that in over 40 states across the country, drivers were not earning at the minimum wage of that state. In New York City, the Taxi and Limousine Commission had found that 85% of drivers had been earning below minimum wage. The poverty and debt is across this economy. And in their IPO filing, Uber has said explicitly drivers should expect to be increasingly dissatisfied because the pay rates will only get lower. And that's one of the main reasons that we're out on strike today itself on May 8th on the eve of their IPO. Thank you so much.
Union power! Drivers power! Union power! Drivers power! Union power!
See everybody at 1 o'clock in Long Island City? That's the rally of the strikers. That's the only rally of the strikers today. Long Island City at 1 p.m.
47th Avenue,
Thank you.
31st Street. Yeah.
We're going to switch over now to the House Judiciary Committee, where they're holding a meeting on Attorney General William Barr. The House Democrats are planning a vote on Barr, holding him in contempt of Congress. Stay with us.
Remain ready and willing to consider any reasonable offer made by the department even after today's vote. But if a letter I received late last night from the department is any indication, I am concerned that the department is heading in the wrong direction. In response to our latest good faith offer, the department abruptly announced that if we move forward today, it would ask President Trump to invoke what it refers to as a protective assertion of executive privilege on all of the materials subject to our subpoena. Just minutes ago, it took that dramatic step. Besides misapplying the doctrine of executive privilege, since the White House waived these privileges long ago, and the department seemed open to sharing these materials with us just yesterday, this decision represents a clear escalation in the Trump administration's blanket defiance of Congress' constitutionally mandated duties. I hope that the department will think better of this last-minute outburst and return to negotiations. As a co-equal branch of government, we must have access to the materials that we need to fulfill our constitutional responsibilities in a manner consistent with past precedent. This is information we are legally entitled to receive, and we are constitutionally obligated to review. And I would remind the members that the Mueller report is no ordinary run-of-the-mill document. It details significant misconduct involving the president, including his campaign's willingness and eagerness to accept help from a hostile foreign government, numerous misstatements, if not outright lies, concerning those acts, and 11 separate incidents of obstructive behavior by the president that more than 700 former prosecutors have told us warrant criminal indictment. If Congress is not entitled to the full unredacted Mueller report, one must wonder what document we would be entitled to. Our exhaustive negotiations with the Department of Justice have unfortunately left us back where we began, with unprecedented obstruction by an administration that has now announced its intention to block all attempts at congressional oversight of the executive branch. It is our constitutional duty to respond. Let me be clear. The information we are requesting is entirely within our legal rights to receive and is no different from what has been provided to Congress on numerous occasions going back nearly a century. But we do not need to go back that far to find the precedent. As recently as the last Congress, under Republican control, the department produced more than 880,000 pages of sensitive investigative materials pertaining to its investigation of Hillary Clinton, as well as voluminous other material relating to the Russia investigation and other ongoing investigations. That production included highly classified material, notes from FBI interviews, internal text messages, and law enforcement memoranda. With respect to grand jury information, in past cases involving allegations of presidential misconduct or misconduct by other high-ranking public officials, the Department of Justice, as a matter of course, has sought the permission of a court to release relevant information to Congress, if not to the public. Notably, this includes several cases that were not impeachment inquiries, including the investigation into former Agriculture Secretary Mike Espy and the Iran-Contra investigations, as well as other investigations that were not governed by the independent counsel law. But no matter the fact that the law and history clearly support the release to Congress of this kind of information, the Trump administration has taken obstruction of Congress to new heights. Unfortunately, the Attorney General has been all too willing to support the President in this endeavor. I would also like to respond to two of the concerns often raised by my good friend, the ranking member. He asks, how can the committee hold the Attorney General in contempt for merely complying with the laws on the books? And how can we hold him in contempt when I have refused an offer to allow me to see certain redacted portions of the report? The answers are simple. First, we issued a valid subpoena for the full report and all of the underlying evidence. The Department has come nowhere close to satisfying its obligations under that subpoena. The Department has never cited a legal basis for withholding the underlying evidence, including last night's threat to invoke executive privilege, which was utterly without credibility, merit, or legal or factual basis, as is, of course, the assertion of, or the statement that they will assert executive privilege by the White House this morning. To the extent that we have asked for access to grand jury information, which is protected by federal law, all we have ever asked is that the Department join us in petitioning the court to determine if it is proper for us to have access to this material. The Department, as I said, has done this on many occasions in the past. We asked for a commitment to join us in that effort again last night, as it has done in many previous cases, and the Department refused. Second, with respect to the offer to lift some of the redactions for me and a handful of my colleagues, the Department has placed unacceptable limitations on access to that information. Their offer would block the members of this committee from reading those sections of the report for themselves. It would require me to leave my notes behind at the Department of Justice. It would prevent me from speaking with my colleagues, with other members of the committee, about what I might see. What good is it? Of what use can this committee make of information that I have but can't discuss with any other member of the committee? I have consistently stated that if we are to do our jobs as members of the House Judiciary Committee, all of the members require meaningful access to the report and the underlying documents. We need to be able to confer with each other about what we have seen. We need to be able to take official action on what we have seen, if warranted. And if necessary, we need to be able to inform a court of law of what we have learned, even if perhaps under seal. If we can find an accommodation that satisfies those basic principles, I would be happy to continue negotiating with the Department of Justice. But now, by invoking executive privilege on all of the material subject to our subpoena, that process has come to a screeching halt. The administration has announced, loud and clear, that it does not recognize Congress as a co-equal branch of government with independent constitutional oversight authority, and it will continue to wage its campaign of obstruction. When the administration says it will oppose all subpoenas, presumably regardless of its merits, it is saying that it does not recognize Congress having a constitutional oversight authority over the executive branch. And to those who consider the matter case closed, in the words of some of our leaders, and who urge us to simply move on, I would say that to do so is to announce loud and clear that such a course of action has the effect of aiding and abetting in the administration's campaign of total, blanket, and unprecedented obstruction. The Trump administration and its enablers may brazenly try to cover up the misdeeds uncovered by the special counsel. But in this committee, we will represent the American people and ensure the truth is known. I urge my colleagues to think about how the Department's latest position and their insistence on ignoring our subpoena affects our committee over time. Our fight is not just about the Mueller report, although we must have access to the Mueller report. Our fight is about defending the rights of Congress as an independent branch to hold the president, any president, accountable. Every day we learn of new efforts by this administration to stonewall Congress, and through Congress to stonewall the American people. The Ways and Means Committee has been denied the president's tax returns when the law states clearly that they are entitled to them upon request. The chairman of the Oversight and Reform Committee has been sued in his personal capacity to prevent him from acquiring certain financial records from the Trump Organization. The president has stated that his administration will oppose all subpoenas, and in fact, virtually all document requests are going unsatisfied. Witnesses are refusing to show up at hearings. This is unprecedented. If allowed to go unchecked, this obstruction means the end of congressional oversight. As a co-equal branch of government, we should not and cannot allow this to continue, or we will not be a co-equal branch of government. I urge my colleagues, whether or not you care to see the full Mueller report, and we should all want to see the complete report, to stand up for the institution we are proud to serve. I expect that we will have a full debate today on the measure before us. I hope that at the end of it, we will do what is right. No person, and certainly not the top law enforcement officer in the country, can be permitted to flout the will of Congress and to defy a valid subpoena. No person, not the Attorney General, not the President, can be permitted to be above the law. That is what is at stake today. I urge all of my colleagues to support this report. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this, and to the folks watching here, this slog continues. Last week, I urged you and my fellow members of the Judiciary Committee Democrats to respect the histories and traditions of this committee and conduct its business accordingly. We still have a crisis on our southern border. China is stealing our intellectual property, yet here we are, wasting another valuable week of legislating calendar against the majority's war against the administration. Today, we are meeting to consider a resolution to hold Attorney General Bill Barr in contempt of Congress. So let's take just a few moments and go through this. What is the justification for holding Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress? Perhaps that he failed to abide by the special counsel regulations? No, he went above and beyond what the regulations required by transmitting the full report to Congress with limited redactions. Could it be that the Attorney General failed to accommodate the chairman's demands for information? No. He offered to let the chairman and 5 other Democrat leaders review the less redacted report at the Department of Justice, including a 99.9% unredacted volume on obstruction. In an odd move for anyone demanding access to information, the chairman and the other elected Democrats given access have declined to view that report. The Attorney General also volunteered to testify before this committee about the report's conclusions and his role in sharing the report. And as we all witnessed, the Democratic gamesmanship forced the Attorney General to forego the scheduled hearing last week. On Monday, the Justice Department offered to meet to discuss accommodations. Yesterday, they made a reasonable offer to avert this spectacle, and once again, they were rebuffed and the chairman declined. Perhaps then the Democrats believe that there has been an unreasonable delay in the Justice Department's response to their subpoena. No, that's not true either. In fact, the chairman is moving to this contempt resolution at lightning speed. It has been less than 20 days since the chairman, Nadler, subpoenaed documents from the Justice Department. When the Oversight Committee held Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt, more than 250 days had passed between the subpoena and the committee's vote to hold him in contempt. More than 450 days passed between the committee's initial request to the Justice Department and the committee's contempt vote. Judiciary Democrats are moving more than 10 times faster than Oversight did with Holder. They have moved from request to contempt vote in only 43 days. And yet the Justice Department is still at the negotiating table waiting for the Democrats to arrive in good faith. Why this rush? Without any valid legislative or administrative reason, we can only assume the Democrats that are led by the chairman have resolved to sully the Bill Barr's good name and reputation to accomplish 2 goals. First, Democrats are angry the special counsel's report did not produce the material or collusions they expected to pave their path to impeaching the president. I feel compelled to remind everyone the report found, despite offers to do so, no one from the Trump campaign knowingly conspired with the Russian government. And you can't help but notice the phrase Russian collusion has vanished from the Democratic talking points and left a void in the narrative. Since the special counsel did not make a prosecutorial determination of obstruction, which was his job, the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General did so according to their mandates as law enforcement officials while giving no credence to the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion regarding that of sitting presidents. As a result, they're angry. They're angry our nation's chief law enforcement officer and his deputy had the audacity to decide the evidence didn't support charges for obstruction and investigation into something the president didn't do. Second, Democrats are afraid of what the Attorney General will find when he completes his ongoing review of FISA abuses at the Justice Department, including how the Russia investigation began. Multiple news reports have suggested those conclusions could be explosive, could end careers, and could even lead to criminal prosecution. Rather than face that, the Democrats have resolved to neutralize Bill Barr by attacking him and the office and his integrity and his career. This is the first step. What a cynical, mean-spirited, counterproductive, irresponsible step it is. Meanwhile, our economy is surging. Unemployment among several minority groups is at a historic low. A recent Washington Post poll shows cratering support for impeachment, but Democrats have no plans, no purpose, and no viable legislative agenda beyond attacking this administration. The House is more than 4 months into a Democratic majority. How many bills passed by this committee have been signed into law? Mr. Chairman, I implore you to see reason. I ask that you recognize the craven and insincere politics that seem to be yielding no dividends for the American people. We've talked on multiple occasions and proved at last week's pharmaceutical markup that I stand ready to work with you to promote solutions. I will not, though, become a bystander as we assail the Attorney General and this committee. Our democracy deserves better. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to quote a fellow member of Congress. As a member of Congress, I treat assertions of executive privilege very seriously. I believe they should be used only sparingly. In this case, it seems clear the administration was forced into a position by the committee's insistence on pushing forward with contempt. Despite the Attorney General's good faith offer, Mr. Chairman, it did not have to be this way. We could have postponed today's vote and accepted the Attorney General's offer. Instead, by not honoring the Constitution's charge to seek accommodations when possible, the prestige of this committee has been diminished. As a result, that should concern us all. I quote Elijah Cummings. In that case, of course, the committee did seek accommodations. In this case, this committee did not. And in just a difference of opinion between me and the chairman, there has been no escalation of this except on the side of the majority. You have to have both sides at the table for accommodations. That's the way this process works. That is what I've just laid out, 10 times faster than even Eric Holder. And when we get into the other issues that have been discussed here, and again, how we deal with this is going forward with what will be the precedent for the future and will be the precedent for what we have. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find William P. Barr, Attorney General.
The amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. The amendment in the nature of a substitute contains a technical change to page 2 of the committee report. It simply changes the reference on that page to Judiciary Committee to the Committee on the Judiciary. With this modest change, I urge the committee to support the amendment. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Collins, for any comments he may have on the amendment.
On the amendment itself, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any as far as the amendment nature substitute. I will make one comment that was made in your previous opening statement. The chairman of now the Oversight Committee was not sued in his personal capacity. He was served in his official capacity in that committee. And just a clarification for the record there as we go forward. With that, I have no objection to the ANS.
Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our Democratic colleagues seem to be on a mission. They're determined to destroy Attorney General Barr, or at least discredit him in the eyes of the American people. The Attorney General agreed to appear before this committee last week and was ready to answer any and all questions about the Mueller report. However, Mr. Chairman, you and your Democratic colleagues on this committee decided that instead of just answering questions from members of the committee, well, we unprecedentedly were also going to require him to be grilled by a bunch of partisan staff lawyers. Of course, the Attorney General wisely said, no way, and now you're determined to find him in contempt. In my view, as somebody who served on this committee for 23 years, I think it's disgraceful. Last week, when the Attorney General refused to show up for this committee's kangaroo court, the majority set up an empty chair, ate chicken, and pretty much made a mockery of this committee, a committee that was once led by the likes of Daniel Webster. It's worth noting that Attorney General did appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee the day before he was scheduled to come here, where the unreasonable demand that he be queried by staff attorneys was not made. Senators did the questioning themselves, as is normal, and the same should have been the case here instead of Chickengate. And let's be clear, it wasn't a day at the beach in the Senate for the Attorney General. The senators themselves were perfectly capable of being rude, abusive, and arrogant all by themselves. They didn't need their staff to do it for them. So why this passion to tear into William Barr, an Attorney General, at least up to this point in his career, considered a person of upstanding, in fact, outstanding character? Well, first, our Democratic colleagues are apparently really ticked off about the Mueller report, that it found that the whole Russian collusion thing was a big fat zero. And even though the obstruction of justice allegation wasn't as clear-cut, Special Counsel Mueller found that there was insufficient evidence to pursue a charge against President Trump or against anyone else for that matter. Excuse me, William Barr did that. So Democrats are mad about that, but what I think is even more important is that our Democratic colleagues are afraid. They're afraid that unlike former Attorney General Sessions, who had recused himself from anything related to the Mueller investigation, Bill Barr is going to dig into the origins of the bogus Russian collusion allegation itself. The Clinton campaign funding of the Steele dossier was the actual collusion between the Russians and the political campaign. Is that something that's finally going to be looked into? That was the real political collusion with the Russians. The FBI's involvement in trying to tip a presidential election in favor of one candidate over another, the whole Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, all of that. The idea that Trump may have been right, that his campaign really was spied on by elements of the Obama administration, despite the fact that this accusation was met with such derision by most of the mainstream press at the time. The bottom line is many Democrats on this committee, and in fact many Democrats in both the House and the Senate, apparently believe that finding out the truth in these matters may not be helpful to them in the upcoming election cycle. And the best way to undermine the results of the investigation, the true investigation, which is really about to happen, might just be to destroy the credibility of the guy who's doing the investigation, the Attorney General, William Barr. And let's begin that process, apparently according to the folks on the other side of the aisle, and the chairman included, by finding him in contempt. That's the way we can really discredit him. At least that's the way I see it. And I yield back.
Before I proceed to the next statement, let me just clarify a point of apparent confusion. We are not proposing to hold the Attorney General in contempt for not showing up last week. He didn't show up last week, but that has nothing to do with this motion for contempt. We are proposing to hold him in contempt for ignoring or for not satisfying the subpoena for the production of documents, namely the unredacted Mueller report and underlying evidence. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady from Texas. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Like the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized. Thank you.
I'm pausing for a moment because I do think this is a moment in history. And I appreciate my good friends on the other side of the aisle. But having received a letter both from a copy of the letter to the President of the United States by General Barr and a letter from the Department of Justice indicating after their purposeful collapse of the negotiations well-intentioned by the staff and House Judiciary Committee, I can only conclude that the President now seeks to take a wrecking ball through the Constitution of the United States of America. For the first time in the history of the United States, a president is now exerting executive privilege over every aspect of life that the American people desire to have information. Whether or not their Affordable Care Act is dissolving the pre-existing condition, whether or not children are being separated from their parents, whether or not the environment is being destroyed. Anything that the Congress wants to do on behalf of the American people is now being alleged to be under the jurisdiction of privilege. Then, of course, we have to surmise that this is an absolute lawless behavior by this administration. The Attorney General actions are contemptuous and insulting to Congress, but we're simply the tools it is to the American people. To broaden the executive privilege and ignore the constant accommodations that Chairman Nadler has made and our staff in working to work out 3 simple points. Give us all of the documents, unredacted Mueller report for the American people to see. Work with us on grand jury materials, not to undermine, if you will, any ongoing investigations, and work with us to list the documents by priority. That is very simple. To recount facts of yesteryear does not even speak to the fact of the hundreds of investigations that my good friends, when President Trump and the Republican House and Senate existed, they never ceased. They never ceased going after Secretary Clinton, getting 880,000 documents in a Benghazi hearing that went forever and ever and never found anything. I happen to believe 700 former prosecutors who indicated that the Mueller report describes several acts that satisfy all elements for an obstruction charge conduct. Congressman Jackson Lee didn't say this. Chairman Nadler did not say this precise statement as a former federal prosecutor. It's 700 who've indicated that the actions of this president warrant an obstruction charge. In addition, we have a right to understand the underlying reasons regarding the collusion report. But the very fact that the collusion part of the Mueller report recounts the constant interaction of Trump operatives with Russian adversaries, the American people should be wary, and they should ask us why. And we should write legislation, as I've introduced H.R. 2353, that says if you interact with a Russian operative or foreign adversary as a campaign committee or candidate, you must report it to the FBI. And so this is part of our legislative work. And I would argue the case that our friends on the other side of the aisle should not be noted in history of standing at the door of justice in this room and putting up a stop sign that we cannot pursue the truth on behalf of the American people. We have gone over and over and over again that there are allegations of obstruction of justice that need to be heard in front of this committee. I say this, Mr. Mueller, a former Marine, a man of integrity, I will say to him in the open proceeding, we welcome you to come and explain your position on how disturbed you were that the Attorney General characterized your report as an exoneration of this administration. Secondarily, I want to say to Mr. McGahn, you are a private citizen. You have every right to present yourself to this body. And also that the conduct of President Trump described in Special Counsel Mueller's report would, in the case of any other person, if not having the Office of Legal Counsel policy against indicting a sitting president, would result in felony charges. There are people incarcerated right now because of lesser charges. I don't want to target the president, Mr. Chairman. I simply want to find the truth for the American people, and that's why we're here today to vote on this citation for lacking of producing of documents. I yield back.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Gentleman from Wisconsin, for what purposes does the gentleman seek recognition? Move to strike the last word. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to step back from the political rhetoric and ask exactly what this contempt citation deals with. And I'm going to try to use my time to do that. First and foremost, and most concerning to every American, or at least it should be, is the fact that they want an unredacted report that includes information on grand jury testimony. The committee, by making this insistence and issuing this subpoena, is telling the Attorney General of the United States to commit a crime, because it's a crime for anybody to disclose grand jury material to anybody else. That includes the Attorney General, it includes the prosecutors in the Justice Department, it includes the witnesses who have been subpoenaed and have testified before the grand jury. It means everybody. And if the grand jury system is to work, and remember, witnesses can't even bring their attorneys into a grand jury, then the secrecy is going to have to be maintained. Now, all of us know that it's really impossible for the people who work on this Capitol Hill to keep a secret. If there is an unredacted version, completely unredacted version, including the grand jury testimony, which is unredacted, it'll be on the front page of every newspaper in the country within 48 hours and talked about incessantly on the cable news shows, whether you watch Fox News or whether you watch MSNBC. Now, I think it is absolutely shocking that the majority of this committee is going to ask the chief law enforcement officer of the United States to commit a crime. Shocking. And there are no exceptions to what is to be disclosed in this unredacted version. That includes the grand jury testimony. And by citing the Attorney General of the United States for contempt of Congress, for saying, I'm standing up for the law, I am not going to break the law by complying with that part of your subpoena, shows an overreach on the part of the majority. If we are to be a government of laws and not of men or people, then we have to obey the law on this end of Pennsylvania Avenue as well as on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And we are not doing that. Now, what else has been redacted? There's been redactions relative to ongoing investigations. Now, do we want to let the people that the Justice Department is investigating know all about the ongoing investigations? I don't think the public interest is served by that. Whether somebody is guilty or not should be determined by the jury in a trial. That's what the American system is, and that's what a lot of the Bill of Rights protects. You also have a protection against people who are peripherally involved in that. They were just on the edges of this. They were interviewed, and nothing came of the interview because they didn't have any evidence on what was being investigated. But there's a character assassination squad running around this town that even if you were on the periphery and went and voluntarily talked to the FBI or Mr. Mueller's team, you're going to end up having your good name and your reputation smeared even though you didn't do anything. So this is definitely an overreach. Those redactions, ended up being justified redactions, and I can understand the reluctance on the part of the Attorney General or anybody else that watches the way this institution and the people who work here operate, that anything that is supposed to not get out in the public realm will get out in the public realm with a leak. And if this place weren't as leaky as a sieve, I would not be opposed to what the chairman is doing because I've stood up for oversight during my entire career in this body. But it is leaky as a sieve. And I think what we're doing here is forcing the Attorney General to break the law, to place in jeopardy innocent people, who are not involved in any of the things that Mr. Mueller ended up investigating, and shaming ourselves in the process. My time is up.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Attorney General has been contemptuous of this committee and of the Congress. He was contemptuous last week when he didn't come, when he couldn't dictate the terms of the hearing. He's contemptuous this week when he will not bring forth papers. The chairman has tried to reach an accommodation with the Justice Department. All cases in the past when such issues have been raised about grand jury testimony, the Attorney General has gone with the majority party, the chairman, to the district court and asked that that information be released to the committee for its purposes. This Attorney General has not done that. If he would have done that and tried to make a reasonable accommodation to join with us in going to Judge Howell, we might not be in this situation. But there's been nothing reasonable from this Attorney General. Mr. Sensenbrenner talks about people on the periphery. We don't know who those people were, but we know that Bill Barr decided which testimony would be redacted because people were on the periphery and to protect their reputations. This is the same person who gave a 3.5-page summary of the Mueller report that did not, according to Special Counsel Mueller, who knew it better than anyone else, reflect the character and the spirit of the report. And he knew Mr. Mueller objected to it for not being an accurate representation of his work, and yet he did it. And when asked about it by Mr. Christ in committee, he had no idea that Mr. Mueller or anybody in the Mueller Special Counsel investigation would have objected. That's not true. He lied when Mr. Christ asked him that question. That's beyond contempt. That's a lie. So we're depending on Mr. Barr's determining who was on the periphery and what their reputations would suffer. We're talking about the opportunity for Congress to do its proper oversight as described in Article 1 of the Constitution, which is being trampled upon. The Trump administration refuses to respond to any subpoenas, destroying Article 1 and Congress's prerogatives. Now, we had a question, I think it was maybe the ranking member said we should be doing legislation, and how many signatures, how many bills have been signed into law by this committee? Well, ask Mitch McConnell, who has declared that the Senate is a graveyard for all legislation that comes from the House. We have passed outstanding legislation out of this committee. It's gone to the graveyard, where Mitch McConnell, who first kills Supreme Court nominees of the last president of the United States in his 1 year before, and voids and frustrates the constitutional prerogative of the president to nominate members to the Supreme Court, but now frustrates the other House by not having hearings whatsoever. Somebody said we're afraid. Yes, we're afraid. We're afraid of the loss of the rule of law. We're afraid of the loss of the power of Congress to be an independent and co-equal branch of government. And we face that today if we don't stand up. And somebody else said that Russia, there are no connections and nothing with Russian collusion. Well, the Mueller report said there was sweeping and systematic efforts by the Russians to influence our election, and they were done so to help Trump. And the Mueller report showed lots of connections between the Trump campaign and Russia, lots of contacts, and didn't show that he had all of the elements to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they conspired together. There's a big difference between not having connections and having guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Then Mr. Trump gets on the telephone with Mr. Putin and has a 90-minute conversation or something like that where he can see on a phone call that he smiled at him and he gets flattered and never broaches the subject of Russian interference in our next election or Russian interference whatsoever. That was one of the prime parts of the Mueller report, that the Russians interfered and that our intelligence officials had confirmed and told us, and that our FBI has told us, and that we know they did it in 2018 and they're going to do it more in 2020. But our president did not even mention it to Mr. Putin. That is scary. We are afraid of interference in the 2020 elections, and we need to be. And we need to be because we've got a man who has been suggested might be financially dependent on the Russians. Why would he be financially dependent on the Russians? Well, we now know he lost over $1 billion in a decade in the 80s and 90s. He was broke. No bank would loan him a penny. He was broke. And if it weren't for him being president, he'd be in prison with Michael Cohen today as individual one, and he obstructed justice as the Mueller report says it so. We are in danger. We need to respond, and we need to act for the people of the United States of America. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Asks to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I'm really here in mourning for a once great Judiciary Committee. I know my first term, 05 and 06, I saw our current chairman as a champion for privacy rights, for civil rights, for Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, and something dramatically has changed over the years. There was concern back then about too much power through the FISA courts, through the Patriot Act, and we shared a number of those concerns. And now this committee majority is on the wrong side of a very important historic time. We've never had the intelligence community, the FBI, people at the top of the DOJ abusing their powers to create a case against a president where there was none, where assets were actually used to try to set up members of the Trump campaign when there was no case, to try to create a case. We ought to be all over that. We ought to be demanding answers from the FISA judge or judges who were either A, content to have fraud committed against their courts, or were complicit. Maybe it was Peter Strzok's buddy that he bragged about in his text that was going to be the FISA judge that signed warrants where there was no probable cause of anything. This was an attempted coup, and history is bringing that into focus more and more clearly. And what does this committee do about the abuses, the attempted coup? It comes in and decides we're going to go after the Attorney General who's trying to clean up the mess. Christopher Wray sure hasn't. Instead of asking from the intel community, let us see the 100% certain proof you have that Hillary Clinton's personal server was hacked by China. No, he covers it up. Says we still hadn't seen it. Well, they hadn't asked to see it. There is a disaster that has occurred in our justice system, and this committee has oversight responsibilities, and we are abusing those. This motion for contempt is not being done in good faith. I'm not going to call anybody on this committee the names that my colleague from Tennessee just did in violation of our rules of decorum. But the truth is, we know that this committee majority is not acting in good faith. How? Because they're moving for contempt for an attorney general failing to turn over material that this majority, at least some, maybe it's just the staff, but some people know that you can't hold someone in contempt. You can vote to do that, but you can't be in contempt for failing to produce things that are illegal for you to produce. How do we know? Somebody over there knows that this is wrong. Is because there was an offer. Look, Attorney General Barr, if you'll join us in going to court and getting a court order so that we can get the grand jury proceedings and evidence, then we will disregard the contempt. Well, that's evidence of a state of mind by the majority that at least somebody over there knows you cannot be in contempt for failing to produce what would be illegal to produce without a court order. You're on the wrong side of history. And there is no joy here in seeing the abuses. I hope and pray literally for the day when we can join forces and quit trying to push this idea of an attempted coup and uncover the abuses that have truly gone on. My time's expired. The committee's has too.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania. For what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you. You know, it's easy to lose focus when the White House and our colleagues across the aisle engage in whataboutism or what is the distraction of the day or even misleading legal arguments. Nobody's asking the Attorney General to disobey the law. We're asking the Attorney General to obey the law and produce the Mueller report and the supporting documentation, the underlying evidence that we've been requesting for a couple months now and that the American people have been awaiting for 2 years. Why is this important? Well, if you think there's no collusion and no obstruction, you haven't read the Mueller report. I admit it's not an easy read, but it clearly states that there was coordination. There's evidence of coordination. It clearly states there are multiple instances of obstruction of justice, and it clearly refers that over to Congress to deal with. Over 700 federal prosecutors have now reviewed that evidence, just the redacted evidence, not even the underlying evidence, and stated unequivocally that it shows multiple instances that would be felonies if it was anyone other than a sitting president. And that's the reason why Mueller didn't charge. He says in his report, it was a sitting president under the rules I'm operating under. I couldn't file charges. That's why it's Congress's job to do something about it. And that's why we're staying focused on our job. I'm not joyful about this. I'm not afraid of where it takes us. What I am is profoundly saddened that we're in a position where we have an administration that is stonewalling, yes, even acting in contempt of not just Congress, not just the rule of law, but the American people. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose is the gentleman?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Bill Barr is following the law, and what's his reward? Democrats are going to hold him in contempt. I don't think today's actually about getting information. I don't think it's about getting the unredacted Mueller report. I don't think last week's hearing was actually about having staff question the Attorney General. I think it's, as my colleague said earlier, I think it's all about trying to destroy Bill Barr because Democrats are nervous he's going to get to the bottom of everything. He's going to find out how and why this investigation started in the first place. Never forget what Bill Barr said a few weeks ago, 3.5 weeks ago when he testified in front of the Senate Finance Committee. Said a lot of important things, but he said four very interesting things. First, he said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon, term he used, upper echelon of the FBI. We all know that's the case. Director Comey's been fired. Deputy Director McCabe fired, lied 3 times under oath, according to the Inspector General. FBI counsel Jim Baker demoted and left, currently under investigation by the Justice Department. Lisa Page demoted and left. Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, demoted and fired. Peter Strzok, the guy who ran the Clinton investigation and the Russia investigation. There was certainly a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. Second thing the Attorney General said 3.5 weeks ago in front of the Senate Finance Committee. Spying did occur. Said it twice. Yes, spying did occur. Third, he said, there's a basis for my concern about the spying that took place. And maybe the most interesting thing, 2 terms he used that frankly I find frightening. He said there was, in his judgment, he thinks there may have been unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance. Scary terms. We got to go back to January 3rd, 2017. Senator Schumer on the Rachel Maddow show talking about then President-elect Trump says this: if you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Now, I don't know if the FBI went after President Trump in 6 ways, but I sure know they went after him in 2 ways. And the first one is the now famous dossier. On October 21st, 2016, the FBI used one party's opposition research document as the basis to go to a secret court to get a warrant to spy on the other party's campaign. That happened. Democrat National Committee, the Clinton campaign, paid Perkins Coie law firm, who hired Fusion GPS, who then hired a foreigner, Christopher Steele, who did what? Talked to Russians and put together this salacious, unverified document that became the basis to get a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. They did it. And when they went to the court, they didn't tell them important things like who paid for it. They didn't tell them that Christopher Steele had already told the FBI and the Justice Department that he was, quote, desperate to stop Trump. And they didn't tell the court that Christopher Steele had been fired by the FBI because he's out talking to the press. They did that. And second, just last Thursday, Just last Thursday, New York Times story. FBI sent investigator posing as an assistant to meet with the Trump aide in 2016. FBI sent someone in, pretending to be somebody else, to talk with George Papadopoulos, who was with the Trump campaign. You know what they call that? You know what they call that? It's called spying. They did it. They did it. They did it twice, and who knows how much more. And what I know is Bill Barr has said he's going to get to the bottom of it. And think about the term he used again. This is important. Political surveillance in the United States of America. I will not yield. Think about that term. He said he's going to put a team together, going to investigate all this. This is critical. And never forget the guy who ran this investigation, Peter Strzok, ran the Clinton investigation and then launched and ran the Trump-Russia investigation. Never forget what he said. Trump should lose $100 million to zero. We need an insurance policy. Told Lisa Page, don't worry, Lisa, we'll stop Trump. This is what Bill Barr wants to investigate. And as my colleagues have said, this is the House Judiciary Committee, with the history this committee has in protecting fundamental liberties and protecting the Constitution. Last week, there was another important document Emmett Flood, sent to the Attorney General. I just want to read a couple sentences. Under our system of government, unelected executive branch officers and intelligence agency personnel are supposed to answer to the person elected by the people, the president, and not the other way around. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a matter of having a government responsible to the people, to we the people. In the partisan commotion surrounding the Mueller report, it would be well to remember that what can be done to a president can be done to any of us. And this committee is supposed to look out for that fundamental fact more than anything else. And we are not doing that today. I yield back.
I would simply observe that, to his credit, Mr. Jordan has been second to none in asking for access to the materials we're asking for the. And I simply ask him: does he still think is he still supporting his own request for that the committee and the Congress be given access to the entire report and the underlying information?
Consistent with the law, and I would ask the chairman. My understanding is Mr. Mueller is going to be here next week. Why are we doing it? You're going to get to ask the guy who wrote the whole darn document. We're all going to get asked him questions. Why don't you hold off on this contempt until at least the guy who wrote the thing spent 22 months and $35 million with a whole bunch of Democrat lawyers putting it together? Why don't you wait and ask him next week before we do this contempt resolution?
I'll answer, well, essentially because it would be useful to read the material before we have him in front of us. In any event, the gentleman, for what purpose is the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For most people in America, the end of the Mueller investigation did not equal the end of the story. The American people want to see and hear the full story, and they deserve to do so. And in fact, Investigator Mueller intended for the American people and for Congress to have the full story. He did so in his unredacted summaries for both the obstruction and the Russian influence investigations. And what happened when he issued his report, William Barr did something unprecedented. He put together his own 4-page summary, which was misleading, which failed to properly and adequately and accurately characterize the conclusions of the Mueller investigators. He did that. He waited for about a month while that narrative marinated among the American people, and it was reduced down to 4 words: no collusion, no obstruction. And they ran with that for a month before finally the redacted report was issued by Bob Barr. But before he issued the report, 2 hours before he issued the report, he had a press conference to again summarize the Mueller report's findings. And again, he failed to accurately portray and represent those results. And so finally, the redacted report was revealed to Congress and to the American people, and the American people and Congress saw clearly that Barr was a part of the president's ongoing obstruction. He obstructed the Russia investigation. He obstructed all matters that Mueller was investigating, and now he's trying to obstruct Congress and the American people in finding out what's in that report. And what is very troublesome is my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are aiding and abetting them in their cover-up. So still, the full results of the Mueller investigation are not known. Congress, the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee has demanded an unredacted report that should be available to all of the members of at least the House Judiciary Committee. The Attorney General Barr has stonewalled, as he has been instructed to do by the president, and he's a willing participant in this, mind you. They are obstructing the American people's ability to understand what happened. They're hiding behind Rule 6E of the Federal Rules of Evidence, which make grand jury proceedings secret. But as my colleague from Wisconsin should know, there are 5 exceptions listed in 6E that enable the disclosure of grand jury information. He knows that. There's no reason for the American people to be misled about that. And William Barr knows that also, and he also knows that previous attorney generals in his situation have gone to Congress, have gone to the courts with the House of Representatives and obtained grand jury materials when necessary. And so this is all part of a cover-up. And it is up to this committee to ensure that we get that report, because we have lawful responsibilities, constitutional responsibilities to engage in, one of which is possibly impeachment. How can we impeach without getting the documents? So we must get this document. The American people expect us to do it. Once we get it, our hearings can continue and lead to whatever they may lead to, including impeachment. And so I ask my colleagues on the other side to stop obfuscating and start working with us to carry out your constitutional responsibilities. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to see that the microphone's working this week. My good friend from Georgia just asked the operative question: how can we impeach if we don't get the documents? How can we impeach if we don't get the documents? Ladies and gentlemen, this hearing is not about the Attorney General. It's not about the Mueller report, 92% of which everyone in America has had the opportunity to read. It's not about the fact that even the portions that the American people haven't been able to read, the chairman's been able to go read had he chosen. This is all about impeaching the president. Now, why don't they just say it? Why don't they just jump to the impeachment proceedings like their liberal media overlords are telling them to do? Well, the reason is that the American people don't support impeachment. And it's easy to understand why. They actually went and elected Donald Trump president of the United States. And I don't think people are going to support impeaching a president who's doing so well. I mean, you got 3.2% growth in the economy. The Trump economy is hot. And the reason we're doing so well is as a consequence of the president's policies. And so at a time when my Democrat colleagues are focused on the next election and not solutions to the problems facing Americans, they can't attack the president's policies because people are doing well. So typically they roll next to identity politics, that based on what you look like, who you pray to, or who you love, you can't possibly support Republicans. But African Americans are doing better. Hispanics are doing better. Women are doing better. We are seeing a rising tide that is truly lifting all boats in this country. And so now we have this effort, not to argue with policies, not to typically go to the identity politics that functions as the organizing principle of today's Democratic Party. They have to delegitimize the guy that won, delegitimize the guy that people voted for, but they don't have the guts to do it directly, and so they're going after the Attorney General. Now, the gentleman from Georgia in his last remark said, we are hiding behind the rules. Hiding behind the rules. These are federal laws that dictate what the Attorney General can and cannot do. We're not hiding behind the rules. We just like to follow them. By the way, it's not following the rules that got us in this trouble in the first place. When the Inspector General testified before us, he said it's the fundamental fact that during the investigations of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, you saw continuous examples of a one-off here, a violation of protocol there. The Inspector General said never before had he seen a circumstance where the very same team that was investigating Hillary Clinton would then go and investigate the other person that was involved in the 2016 presidential contest. About a month ago, in this committee, I laid out the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think that folks watching at home can probably follow along and see where we're headed. First, my Democratic colleagues were in denial. When they saw that there was no collusion, after saying for 22 months that the president was an agent of the Russian government, after saying for 22 months that there was actual evidence of collusion, they were in denial when they saw the conclusion that there wasn't. Then there was anger. It had to be the Attorney General's fault. Mueller didn't make a decision on obstruction. Somebody had to. The Attorney General did. So they got mad at him. And we had this whole kerfluffle of anger. Well, now we know the third step: bargaining. Well, Mr. Attorney General, you've given us 92% of the Mueller report, but we have to bargain for the remaining 8% because that's really where we think the action is. Well, Mr. Attorney General, you spent 5 hours before the Senate Judiciary Committee. 3 of our presidential candidates got to question you. You offered to come before the House Judiciary Committee. You offered to come for an additional hour of questioning, but we have to bargain so that our staff lawyers can ask you questions. Now, I don't think it's a good sign that the next sign after bargaining is depression. So I feel for my Democrat colleagues, but after that we get to acceptance, and that's sure something that I'm looking forward to, because there are some really good ideas that my Democratic colleagues have once they kind of get to acceptance on the no Russia collusion thing. My friend, the gentleman from Rhode Island, has excellent ideas about how to change the way that consumers interface with big tech companies. My colleague from the state of New York is right, that if the First Step Act is the only Step Act, then that would be a bad thing. We need to do more on criminal justice reform. My colleague who's not with us from California, Mr. Swalwell, he's got great ideas to unlock potential cures with medical cannabis reform, but we're not doing any of those things. And by the way, I bet a bunch of my friends on the other side of the aisle low-key wish that their actual bills that would impact the lives of Americans would get heard instead of this garbage. The Obama administration ran an intel operation against the Trump campaign. Peter Strzok opened it up, the dossier kept it going, and now the Democrats need to get over it. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Florida. What purpose is the gentleman from Florida recognized? Move to seek recognition.
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we're here today because we're witnessing the breakdown of the foundations of our nation's constitutional order. That's why we're here today. In 1974 in U.S. v. Nixon, the Supreme Court warned of moments just like this when they said, once executive privilege is asserted, co-equal branches of the government are set on a collision course. The court went on to explain that such a collision, and I quote, places courts in the awkward position of evaluating the executive's claims of confidentiality and autonomy and pushes to the fore difficult questions of separation of power and checks and balances. These occasions for constitutional confrontation between the two branches are likely to be avoided whenever possible. Why are we on this collision course today? Because the Attorney General of the United States refused to provide information that is not privileged and is subject to the committee's subpoena. The committee issued a subpoena for information gathered by the special counsel. There's no privilege for this information. Executive privilege is not a cloak of secrecy that drapes across our nation's capital from the White House to the Justice Department. Yet last night, the Attorney General threatened a blanket privilege claim over materials that he knows are not privileged as retribution for the markup that we're holding right now. And this morning, he asked the president to do just that. It's striking how empty that gesture is. Chairman Nadler pointed this out last night. The Attorney General's request of a blanket privilege claim is empty of any credibility. It's empty of merit. It's empty of any legal or factual support. The Attorney General ordered his staff to send what he would define as a snitty letter last night. But those words were empty. Executive privilege exists to help the presidency function, to ensure that the president gets good advice and can make important decisions without interference from Congress. But that's not at stake here. We're asking for information that is no longer held in confidence among the president and his closest advisors. We're just asking for the truth that many already know but is being withheld from the public. Investigators know the truth. Private attorneys know the truth. The ranking member of this committee has seen it. The privilege no longer applies. What does apply is the American people's interest in the truth and the need for this committee to do its job, to protect our elections, to protect our national security, to hold the president accountable, and to draft legislation to ensure that no one, not the Attorney General, not the president, is above the law. Yet the Attorney General continues to mislead the American people. And after being caught in a lie in his testimony to Congress, he has now joined the president in his ongoing obstruction of the House. Congressional hearings and document requests are normal. They're normal. This committee holds an oversight hearing with the Attorney General every year. That is normal. But this collision course the President and Attorney General set us on is not normal. This collision is the definition of a constitutional crisis, and the breadth of this obstruction is beyond anything in our nation's history. The President has said that Mueller should not testify here. He has ordered without authority Don McGahn to refuse to testify here. He has ordered, in violation of the law, that the Treasury Secretary continue to hide his tax returns. He has blocked or delayed more than 30 requests from Congress. He has blocked testimony about the security clearances granted to his family members. He has blocked testimony about the humanitarian disaster caused by the Trump family separation policy at our southern border. This sweeping repudiation of Congress and congressional investigations is unprecedented, and it is unconstitutional. This is a government of, by, and for the people. The Attorney General of the United States is stonewalling the people. He is misleading the people. And he is actively working to suppress the truth. I don't understand, still, every time we have one of these hearings, how it is that none of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem at all concerned about Russia's attack on our democracy and their desire to do it again. And I close with this. The Mueller report finishes by reminding us that the protection of the criminal justice system from corrupt acts by any person, including the president, accords with the fundamental principle of our government that no person in this country is so high that he is above the law. We will continue to assert our oversight authority out of a duty to maintain the checks and balances that preserve the powers of separation and co-equal branches of government. A failure to do so would be a failure of our constitutional system of government. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Gentleman reserves a point of order. Is there an amendment at the desk?
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us again tomorrow at the same time, 10 a.m., and follow Fox 29 at the fox29.com site, and Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest breaking news. Thanks for joining us.